Hello there, and welcome to the value of everything. Now we are up to a beautiful number of an episode, which does represent the top and tail position or sexual position known as the 69. And what a beautiful way to give me an idea. I will do a topic about sex. Okay, or sexuality and things like that. I've got to just connect some philosophic dots. I can't really go into actually giving you a sex story, but I will try, because I would be probably pretty terrible and at the best times, and I would be, even though I am trying to put myself on the web, I'll be fairly embarrassed at that stage in itself. It's an interesting aspect of our privacy with sex, not sexual nature, which I'll get into a little bit later. Okay, so let's look at sex. So sex is obviously incredibly important in our lives. It is the two primary directives of life itself, and you'll look around your garden, you'll look around the woods, you'll look around most non-human environments, and you will see a situation of sex and survival going on throughout everywhere that you look. It is the key two factors to life, and if you eat any kind of fruit or anything like that, and you see that little crappy bit at the bottom of the piece of fruit, like the banana, you got this little black bit of crap at the bottom, that was once a flower, and that was to be inseminated, and la la la. There's all these kind of funny little things which are all around the world, which you don't quite notice, but so sex is all around us. We don't quite realize how it is obviously ingrained into everything that we see, and if you think or consider that the drivers for, say, our sexuality itself, so say if we want to attract the opposite sex, so we, us males, have got a abundant supply of sperm, and the females have got a very limited supply of eggs and certain amount of cycles, and then it takes another 9 months to produce the child. So there is definitely a scarcity in that resource. There is obviously the positive and the negative charge of this whole situation which is occurring. But from that point, obviously, as we know that there is a limitation from the aspect of the woman's side, we prefer to attract the opposite sex by building upon resources, maybe building upon our strength of our sexuality, or building upon the wealth and the resources that we can provide on to our children. This is obviously why we have an incredible amount of stuff in this world, and status, and all of these interesting things. I guess some of it doesn't quite boil down to actually our happiness, and if we're investing an incredible amount of time in sexuality and not really focusing on our own happiness, I know obviously sexuality can be part of happiness itself, but there is a little bit more to life than just purely sexuality. You can see how it really does shape the world. Okay, so all right, so just imagine if we didn't have sex in our lives. It really, or even the survival aspects. I think there's a really good movie. I forgot the name, which is always great, but it's always in like some good sci-fi top 100 lists all the time, and it's about everybody cannot reproduce anymore other than this one black girl, and then this guy takes this black girl through like some war-torn area, and there's my god, my name recognition this morning is incredibly poor. Who's the main character in Alfie and Batman's butler? And did the Italian job. Okay, well, he's in it anyway. But yeah, it doesn't matter. And he does like loads of weed, and he listens to dance music, which is quite funny. All right, maybe that's me in the future. Okay, so in that situation, obviously, there is a bit of depression. There's obviously depictions of people just seeing a little bit of a pointless attitude to life, and there's a little bit more of just people, I don't know, being a bit more reckless and things like that. So obviously, if you've taken away just one of those elements of survival or sexuality, I guess obviously you can't really take away survival itself, or you'll all be dead. But if you take away sexuality, so nobody has the capability of reproducing, and they also knew that they were mortal. So obviously you can change them. There's potential that you, like only now with today's technology, that you might be able to extend your life quite rapidly. So that could change a certain paradigm. But when it comes to our sexuality, say if we become infertile, there is obviously certain things which can occur which affects life. Now, there obviously are a lot of people which choose not to have children in life, or maybe just have made that wise choice to say, okay, well, maybe I'm probably not going to be a good parent, or maybe I can have a happier and affect people in a more of a beautiful way if I do not have children and commit to that lifelong bond. There is certain people in this world that have obviously attained a certain level of happiness and they haven't got any children, and maybe it might have been because of their own infertility or anything like that. So it's not like it's the total destruction of the world itself, but it obviously, if you have somebody that is really ingrained to having children, and that's one of their main targets of life, is to cultivate a child, inspire them, make them like a good influence in factor in the world for the next generation, and that ability is taken away from that person, then obviously that can have a detrimental effect on one person's psyche and can be incredibly destructive to one person's mind and make them fairly depressed. So I think sexuality is fairly important, and our ability to reproduce is obviously incredibly important. Obviously, even though we are mortal, we do have the chance to reproduce, which is that sort of little backway card in that factor of survival. And it does flourish all of these incredibly important stuff. So this is why it's important, I guess. It is a fundamentally important factor of a race to attract the other mate and to improve on oneself. Okay, so I guess. Okay, let me just go back a little bit further on sexuality. So now that I do a podcast on the value of everything, let's just apply this to sexuality. Now, I've heard this before, and obviously this is the easiest one to class on here. Everyone says that the oldest profession is prostitution, and that is the transaction between, either way, it doesn't really matter too much, but I guess predominantly a male goes to a female and gives her money, and in return she will provide him with a certain amount of sexual stimulation. Now, obviously, the main driver behind this is obviously the scarcity. When you have scarcity and abundance in a certain scenario, then you do have that economic factor which occurs. Now, you could say, okay, well, there's no love in that relationship, and obviously, if you just had that, obviously there is a slightly different version of that kind of relationship, whereby you would get a ugly businessman who is a multi-millionaire, billionaire, and he has an incredibly hot wife. Now, okay, so there may be certain elements of that man that woman is quite attracted to. Maybe that woman is quite attracted to that business, that man's entrepreneurship. He may be a very good social, high-standing person. He obviously does attract her in a lot of other things in terms of the wealth and riches that he can provide to his children or their children. And obviously there is a kind of prostitution-esque relationship which is occurring there. Now, how I'm muddying the water, and obviously there is certain areas which cannot really be pointed the finger at all these different classes. Now, I would say the best kind of relationships is where you have fundamental rules of one's virtues, and you are trying to interconnect those virtues in a certain manner and way where you think, okay, well, this person has my values, shares the same values as what I do, and we make each other happy, and there is certain amounts of this, that, and the other, and you are really just meeting each other right in the middle in terms of virtue, and it is a blossoming relationship where you try and improve on each other day by day. So that's obviously a good term of a relationship, but I'm going to go back into the transactional side of things. Now, there are certain relationships which are purely based upon lust or sexual desire. So this is purely a transaction of I am very attractive. Are you very attractive? Yes, you are very attractive. Then you may have a sexual relationship with me. Now, this also ties into another problematic stage, because there isn't obviously any kind of review of how nice or good that person is, and is just really connected into the status factor of how attractive or how lookism is approaching the entire structure there. So I've done a podcast itself on lookism, how there is a massive benefit to being fairly attractive in society. People will extend their arm out a little bit further for you because of your heightened level of perceived fertility. Okay. All right. So there is a transactional thing that's going on, and maybe there's just even like the one that's a little bit more opaque is like a slightly more leveling factor. Maybe you might have a slightly, let's just go in scores. Let's just try and value the system a little bit more weirder. Let's go for, if you had a 8 out of 10 female going out with a 5 out of 10 so did I say female? Let me start again. So you have a 5 out of 10 male in looks going out with an 8 out of 10 female in looks, but that male has just to meet that transaction point, he does have an incredible social factor to him, and he does have a certain amount of resources beyond the other woman's capability. So therefore, there still could be this slightly prostitutionally inclined transaction involved in terms of how that sexual relationship or romanticism incurs. Now, obviously, I'm really just calculating the actual terms of sexuality here. I'm really removing a lot of interpersonal factors here, and I will just go into that, and I will delve into that a little bit later. I'm not just going to brush over it and say that this is a monetary transaction or something that can be shared in value in bits and bops. But obviously, I would say that the warmest, the strongest virtues, the virtues where love lie. Obviously, you cannot love anything without virtue. Is obviously the transaction of a bucket load of virtues being shared between two people. That is where the most ultimate transaction is occurring, and it is a net positive on both sides of the scale, rather than some kind of, I've got some limits, you've got some limits, but I've got these positives and you've got these positives, so we're going to meet halfway in this transaction. So I guess if I'm trying to be in a calculative little mythology here, the slightly prostitution-y sort of aspect of things is where there's deficits and negative and positives, deficits and surpluses, and there is some kind of extra transactional thing which is occurring to meet these two people in between to create their bonding. But the best sort of way is to have a shared aspect of virtues, and this isn't some kind of limitation. This is always an ability to grow from. All right. So hopefully I made some kind of sense there, but I think that's maybe the best form of relationships and sexuality. Okay. Okay, so let's go on sexual orientation. From a moral aspect, there is obviously no problem whatsoever for a man to have sex with another man, or a woman to have sex with another woman, or any other sort of combination, if the property owner, or say the person owner, is absolutely in agreement with the other person. So there is a certain element of voluntarism in the transaction. It's totally fine. There's no problem with it, and there's obviously it's incredibly encroaching as what the government's been on in the past to these kind of relationships and society and social structures as to how they depict what people should be doing in their entire private lives. So yeah, sexual orientation is obviously out there. I'm no incredible expert as to how sexual orientation happens or occurs, but I guess there is. I'm going to just totally give a broad aspect as to what there is out there. I would imagine there is probably a very strong component of being very gay, and you definitely was gay throughout your life from a very early onset. Maybe there is also probably some fairly bisexually aspects as well, because that obviously exists at certain points as well. So maybe there's been certain gay experiences in the past which has maybe led you to have certain orientations in the future. Who knows exactly what sort of there is obviously the massive debate of nurture versus nature, but I would say that there's probably every single one of those probably does apply in different people's sexuality, and I think there is a massive multitude of effects which can occur, which can lead up to somebody's sexual orientation. All right, so yeah, so just let's move on from that point. Okay, so private lives, obviously, that's a really interesting one as well. Everybody has a fairly normalized private life, I would say. They all go around, they shake each other's hands, they say hello, they say goodbye. They're all sort of having a certain measurement of social etiquette which they apply with themselves in the world. And it's all fairly normal, but obviously when that man or that lady goes home and they're in their own bedroom, obviously they can do any kind of weird shit they like to in themselves. And obviously we've sort of it is like the two lifestyle. Now obviously in virtue you would say, okay, well this doesn't really meet with the quality of consistency and honesty, because there is obviously these two elements in life which these two factors, and I guess I do have a certain more of a stronger bond of honesty and maybe well, obviously consistency of sexuality is probably going to be more so with my partner, but with close friends obviously we'll go into more details as to what our sexual desires are and things like that. But yeah, there is a two life or a second life which people do have, and it's kind of interesting how everybody walks around and stuff like that, and you never really quite know what kind of weird shit they get up to, and yeah, it's fairly interesting. And obviously there has been like comic book heroes like Superman and stuff like that, where you've got this second life where you do have this ulterior thing where you do this kind of this act, and you think obviously it is the act in nature of man. You have heard that there's obviously men that can have extramarital affairs and they can act like they're this single guy on the weekend going out, and then on the then they can return back to their families. So there is this kind of what shall we say, some kind of some second split personality which can occur in terms of our own sexuality. Maybe that's a little bit destructive and can destroy lives. And obviously there is, if you look at some of the best inventors, entrepreneurial people and things like that, they have really tried to curtail their sexuality. You look at Socrates, he mentioned things about that. You look at Tesla, he sort of didn't really have any girlfriends or anything on those kind of things. You may think, these are probably weirdos, probably, I don't know, sticking all kinds of stuff up their asses and muffling their mouths on the weekend. But you never really know. I'm not quite sure exactly what happened, but they... that apparently they did all curtailed their sexuality just to purely focus on meeting their ends or their certain disciplines. So, sexuality obviously can be a very pulling. It can be a bit of a lead weight on people's lifestyle. Obviously, men's sexuality can be very sort of addictive. There is addictive sexuality which can occur. Obviously, this can occur in women as well, and it can have an incredible impact on people's lives. If you think of all the time that you've spent masturbating and you could have learned playing the guitar, then I would imagine that you would have probably been a fairly accomplished guitarist by now. So it's one of those things. It's interesting. Obviously, we have to have that, or that sexual desire thing, or it just really, the whole system would grind to a halt. But yeah, there is a certain amount of discipline in nature with that kind of thing, and how to master our sexuality is probably something that we probably don't quite hear or listen to that much. It's probably really just says liberate yourself, do whatever you want to do sexually nowadays. But I guess there is a strong element of control and discipline, and a lot of control and discipline probably derives around our sexual wants. Now, obviously, this goes back down to, say, if we're in the tribal days, and I really want to, let's say, mate with the tribal leader's current partner, but I know the tribal leader's current partner is going to probably die pretty soon, so I have to hold myself until that day has happened, and then I can acquire all his resources and take over his wife and things like that. So there must have been all these kind of little weird factors which created certain disciplines. Obviously, disciplines may have arose from our own sexuality and how we've said, right, I'm going to work hard. Say this person's beating me up. I'm going to go out to this forest and start lifting up these pieces of wood until I become very strong, and then I'm going to come back and kick his ass so I can have his harem of women. There is obviously this important factor of competition, this incredible thing which obviously competition drives us to being very disciplined itself and improve on oneself. And obviously, if you do look at the sexes, there is a hyper competitiveness in males in comparison to females. Not to say that obviously some women can be very competitive, but obviously with the situation of abundance of supply of sperm and limitations of eggs and fertility cycles and things like that, there has been some kind of, I would imagine, some kind of physical makeup to a man which makes them more determinant to be hyper competitive. Maybe it's more ingrained in the hormonal factor of testosterone. So yeah, we have private lives and we have competitiveness and yeah, some other stuff. So okay, so there's other things obviously which happen with this private life, and obviously there's this area where it can encroach out to the open world, and it does go into some kind of weirdness where you get this man who lays on trees and starts to look at other women with binoculars and stuff like that. So if the private life or the sexual nature of the private life starts to encroach into the outside world, and that gives that person the adrenaline rush or the sexual kick factor of chasing down or displaying himself in public or displaying herself in public, there is obviously elemental weirdness which is going on here. And again, it's a very strange subject, and it is a type of, obviously, it's an encroachment onto other people, and it's obviously quite scary. Obviously, if you've got a man who's usually about 30% more stronger than a woman, sexually gratifying himself in front of her, obviously that is quite threatening at the best of times because she doesn't know what's going to happen next. So there is a lot of dangerous aspects to, more so obviously, men's sexuality because of the heightened strength element, but obviously there is elements in women's sexuality as well. It's obviously deemed as not quite as dangerous as men. If you saw a naked woman walking down the road, probably you get a lot of men just beeping the horns and going, "Ooh," especially if she was quite attractive. However, if you saw a man walking down the road naked, and yeah, like everyone would be like, "Oh, what is he doing?" Like that and things like that. So it's just there is these social norms which would occur, and yeah, you do have a good point in society here. Now, I need to just touch upon this point. I did make this point in actually just I think only the previous podcast here, but I'll briefly run over it. There's obviously there's property rights, and property rights of oneself is probably the most important. So I can't go over and slap you around the face because it is a destruction of your property, and who knows, there could be certain brain damage, whatever happens, which could occur and hurt you and have permanent effects. So that's one element of property rights. But then I would say that there is another element of certainly the shaping and the modeling of your own sexuality. Now, if I make contact with children and I show them certain porno videos or whatever goes on, or something strange in a sexual fashion, I have completely changed potentially their mindsets of their own sexuality, and that could be fairly destructive. And I think children really should be protected from any kind of eroticism to a certain extent. Obviously, there is a guide in hand in terms of just knowing that sexuality happens, and probably discussions like this is probably a little bit more important than just sort of a conversation of just, oh, look at that woman, look, she looks brilliant now, look at the curves. Yeah, it's an important thing to just obviously talk and know. Obviously, it's some area of discipline that people should master over time, but obviously it's perfectly fine. It's perfectly a thing of human nature. However, if I am trying to really control somebody's sexual nature, that is incredibly damaging, and obviously that can create an immense amount of confusion for people. There is a certain flourishment of a human's brain, and I think there is a certain element of innocence, which I think is probably the ultimate thing, which should be protected and preserved over time. That if you destroy somebody's innocence, then there is, I guess, there's you're really growing up a child a lot quicker than what they should be growing up to be, and they haven't really grown to a sexual maturity, all those kind of things. I'm talking about obviously very like almost like molesting, but in any sense, obviously sexuality in children is a fairly dangerous thing. I guess I have to point the finger at this point as well here. The old philosophers probably were a little bit inclined to be involved with young philosophers. I think there may have been certain destructive elements in that, and I'm not sure exactly what was going on there, but there is definite stories of how society accepted that kind of thing. But I am definitely on the footing of really protecting children's innocence as long as humanly possible, and to ensure that the innocent mind can flourish, and ideas can flourish, and virtues and all of those beautiful things can flourish before you really sort of lead them away into a certain sense of gratification and saying, okay, it's okay to gratify yourself, and not really discipline oneself. I know it sounds a bit draconian and stuff like that, but I'm trying to explain a certain model of saying sexuality is perfectly fine, explore it as much as you want to in those terms, but where it comes to giving you ideas or explaining how I feel sexually gratified, I don't think that's really my sort of thing that I should explain to you, and it's really should be curtailed and things like that. And that's why I think maybe that's a connection into our private lives, as to I should say, okay, well, this is what I like, and I can explain that to my partner and things like that. So there is a certain element, and protection should be met at every level when it comes to hypersexualization in public realms and things like that. So, okay, I'm going to blur the waters now, because it's never quite as clear cut as what it all seems. And regardless of If I try and shape a child's world into not really knowing too much about sexuality, it does still exist all around us and everything else. There is mild forms of sexuality which are shown all the time if you are wearing, let's say, fairly revealing clothes which accentuate sexual features. There is sexualization which is going there if you flirt and things like that. There is sexual promiscuous with things which are going on around in the environment, and children are obviously fairly aware of these things. So it's important to know this stuff. And what shall we say about these points? It's tricky. It's a very tricky point, and obviously it is ingrained into us. I guess a man's strength is really, it goes to the sort of positive negative thing. Is obviously a man is trying to get the woman, so he's trying to dominate or outcompete the other men to become the alpha man and get his lady. Now, that is where he comes to be this sort of alpha, the stoic-looking man who's got this strong-shouldered body and all this kind of stuff. And then there is obviously then you have the submissive side of things. I know I'm very stereotyping things here now, but this is just a little bit of sexuality which is occurring here in nature. So then you have a certain amount of submissiveness. So then a lady would maybe just float her hair back and just show her acceptance to the man, just to say that there is a certain little bit of submission which is going to the power of this man, and there is a certain element of flirtation which is occurring based upon these two beings. So you can see where that derives from. I guess obviously dominance and competition is a strange, interesting thing. But I would say probably the best form to be is to be really more socially adept and really understand all these things. You don't really need to go through life really dominating everybody else and showing you're the alpha. I think you really can get a very nice environment where everybody is competing just based upon one's virtues, more so than trying to be this dominating arsehole. Right, okay. Okay, so yeah, I sort of mentioned about protecting young minds. I don't think I really explained it too well. I'm probably going to get a backlash, but yeah, there is a certain element where sexuality does need to be explained to children, but obviously giving them kind of sexual ideas or pictures and things like that, and telling them what to think. I guess this is probably maybe the point I'm getting to, is telling them how to think in terms of sexuality is probably a little bit more destructive and dangerous. So yeah, I think that's probably the point in which I'm going to, and it's really not for you to encroach on an organically growing mind in terms of their sexual environment. Now, obviously, throughout time, people have had a very heightened view of property ownership. And particularly in the olden days, there was this sort of old theory that you would have a man, or you would have a boy who would inherit the land, and then you would have a girl who would pretty much be representative as property, which you would exchange for bits and bobs. So it's kind of some kind of interesting thing going on there. I guess maybe there was a view that the man was strong and could be the wealth generator, so therefore the hierarchy of the system would be that the wealth generator would be better off owning the land and having the ownership and things like that and managing things. And I guess this is probably just this old style of thing, and therefore a woman was classed as let's say a important good, or a very rare commodity. I know this sounds incredibly poor, but let's just go with this anyway. And should be exchanged in terms of goods and things like that. So, and obviously that when they are having children and stuff like that, it is more of a cost to the family structure and the survival based of the tribe or anything like that. So therefore, a lady could be exchanged, because if you had tons of ladies and very few men, you economically probably would have incredible problems trying to survive because they would breed quite rapidly and require an immense amount of resources, and therefore without any wealth generators, say the men going out hunting, then you would have a incredible problem on your hands of starvation. So I guess that's where the roots of ownership goes and occurs, and obviously it still occurs to this day, where children are in arranged marriages, where parents decide upon which mate, or give you a selection of mates of who to go with, and it could be based upon religious elements, or potentially just status, and or wealth, or how good they are at providing for families. So obviously a child will be or a young man or a young female may be sort of caught up in the ideals of lust, but a family member may be able to make the right choices based upon very good old-fashioned principles, and therefore they are probably better at choosing they're thinking that they're better at choosing your mate more so than oneself. Okay, so I think I've gone into that point as well in the past, but it's an important factor to think of in terms of ownership where we come to sexuality. Obviously, I just state that we own our bodies and anything that we produce and make, and we can assign to oneself in a voluntary measure of exchange. However, sexuality is incredibly important in a lot of factors. Now, where we go into ownership, I've got to go into the political side of things as well, and this is incredibly important. Our sexuality does dominate politics itself. Now, people don't quite realize this, but as we are procreate in generally monogamous relationships, there's no polygamy going on. We have a certain factor which goes on where we have specialization, or we have certain focuses in individuals. So we have individual empowerment. We produce individuals, we are individuals, and we produce these individuals who have individual minds and individual consciousnesses, and they go around about their world, and they do their own things. Now, if I murked the water and I just said that I am the queen bee, or the king bee, and everybody is a child of mine, and we all just procreated, and I was the procreator, then the social structure is that everybody is related to me anyway, and therefore we are more so in a communist society where I am the leader, and obviously I just sit back and I just mate with everybody, and you just are the worker bee. So you can see the communist structure. Obviously, the communist structure is obviously some socialism which occurs where you have wealth extraction. So you might just be working hard all day long, but there is no sort of individual rights upon oneself. Therefore, all of your goods gets re-socialized back around all the other factors. And maybe you might have defense humans. You might have drone humans that do work. You might have reproductive humans, but you can see how sexuality and the way in which our entire environment is formed by the fact that we produce individuals rather than we have this polygamy situation which occurs. So monogamy versus polygamy, and it's a very important factor, and it does create ideas of even philosophy and everything else. I truly believe that our own individualism is incredibly important, and it really doesn't help that we're all just some big ant structure or ant colony or anything like that, which we go about our business and we all just blended into one, being just some kind of nothingness of clones. But we are all individuals with all our imperfections and all of our assets, all working in unison just to create improvements of lives and improve living standards of all to further humanity. So, okay, so that's just a very important factor of sexuality, and is really does sex never really gets mentioned too much, or never gets put beside politics too much. I know, obviously, they seem like there's nothing very sexy about politics in itself, but it's fairly important. Obviously, this does encroach onto economics as well. Our own individual, the desires and the wants of us attracting a very attractive woman, or a high status woman, or whatever, or vice versa, or high status man, is ingrained to the economics of the world in which we live in. I would say that we are a little bit more materialistic than what we should be, and there is probably something in connection between the media and hypersexualization and excessive inflation and interest rates, which and low interest rates and low inflation, which and this economy situation, which does give us a certain element of promiscuousness, and let's obviously just highlight certain things of how the government can change our own sexuality as well. If we do have things like there's child benefits, and there's incentives and rewards, or there's tax reductions for us to have more and more children, then that does incentivize us and de-incentivizes us to have more children and reproduce. So there is a governing factor over us as well, in terms of how policy can change the ideals of how individuals choose to go about their business. Maybe they thought that one was enough, or one was pretty much all that they could economically afford. However, with all of these benefits which have been passed by a government who requires a higher and higher population to pay off more of a debt bill or debt burden in the future, so all these westernized economies need these continuously growing populations to pay off all these bills in the future, which they keep on sending out in gilts and bonds. It does give us this determinant area of sexuality amongst these are just general families, but obviously in welfare classes as well, you can have people that go on welfare and still have children, and then still say, can I get welfare from the states for my children as well? So therefore there is this knockdown of the provider. There is no wealth generator other than the governing force, which can extract wealth from other people and put back into the pockets of people that are on welfare. So there is incredibly important factors here. I know some people might say it's a human right to have children, but really one of the important factors over time, and it's always been incredibly important, is can you afford to have children? And one of the most important factors of our own sexuality, and obviously women know this and everything else, is that there does need to be some certain kind of provider that can get up and go to work every day and sustain the family, or the family just doesn't work and it just goes to ruin, and the children have to be adopted and sent out to society. This is what's happened in the past when there wasn't any kind of benefit system or wealth extraction system that happened. So sexuality has had an incredible kick in terms of how it's been structured, in terms of how the political system and how the economic system all works and interconnects in our society. And this does go back to the principle of how our sexuality doesn't really fit in with this top-down measured sort of socialism sort of style of things, but we really thrive amongst our individualism. So that's why where we had the founding fathers go to America and they say, okay, we're going to give you more liberal rights, where we have a low taxation system where people can flourish and produce their ideas and do this kind of beautiful stuff. You can see that the sexual system and everything else, and the monogamy and all those kind of things, work beautifully in that system, and then you have a blossoming of people's living welfares until the government goes, oh, this is incredible, let's get a load of more tax and we'll just do some more wealth redistribution, until it starts to bite itself in the arse. Okay, so that's a little bit of sexuality which is occurring there. Now let's go back, let's bring us back. Now in terms of sexuality, there is things that are occurring in people's minds and brains which are fairly important. Now, there is desires and pleasures and energies and things like that which are going on in the mind when we are motivated to do certain things. And I think I need to go back to this very important factor, is that we are what we repeat. So if we do start to entertain a certain idea or theory of our sexuality in our minds, and then we repeat that idea of sexuality in our minds to a certain degree, then it becomes us, and we become that person. And obviously that is the thing that obviously encroaches from our private life into outer society. So there is certain elements of warning and aspects of discipline where we do try to master and control the factors of our sexuality. Okay, so all right, so there is a sexual response cycle. Now, that's kind of fairly. It might sound a bit strange, but obviously, I think that this has been determined as a universal, or it wouldn't have been mentioned. But there is four phases, in fact, and one of them, the first one, is excitement. Excitement is obviously entwined with addiction. Addiction is fairly important. I mentioned in things as well, where the podcast as well, where addiction is a fundamental driver in our lives. If we didn't have addiction, then really we just do not have any striving to achieve or like really accomplish things. Now, addiction is a theory of, I believe in the future that I am going to achieve a certain amount of success from this outcome. So let's just go for an orgasm. So I think I'm going to achieve a very strong orgasm by doing this sexual thing, this sexual act. Now it's then I work at that, and then I find it does. So it's that is an interconnection thing of addiction, and then obviously that addiction can promote on these things. Now, obviously, if I think, okay, well, that worked, maybe I should try push that even further in terms of my addiction and my sexuality, and go a little bit further. So I'm sort of trying to explain to you how that can really encroach from private life into personal life. Okay, next one up would be in terms of excitement. I wanted to go a little bit more further into addiction. So yeah, where we go into addiction, there is an interconnection between our own addictions and sexuality. It seems that we are really, whenever we're going out and say we go to pubs and clubs and bars and things like that, there is things like drugs which are taken, which are always, pretty much all the drugs which are taken are highly addictive in themselves. Alcohol, a depressant to enable us potentially to talk to the other sex. You have cigarette smoking. What else have you got? You can take illegal drugs. There's things like meth, which does interconnect with our what's the word? Dopamines, which is all the releases of our sexual nature. There is obviously, a lot of these things that get released in terms of taking addictive drugs are all sexual elements. I think there's something called oxytocin, which may be correlated to things like where you take opiates like heroin. And obviously that gives us this feeling of warmth and belonging and things like that. And maybe that connects with drugs like ecstasy as well. So you can see that addiction and taking illicit drugs or drugs in general does tap into parts of our brain which program us to be sexual beings, and it really sort of it connects and channels into that point and really pushes us into that point. So there's a strong part of addiction, and addiction is very important, but if you can be disciplined with one's addiction, then you can really master incredible things and you can achieve beautiful things. And You can just make predictions that I'm going to try this new methodology of creating an engine today and seeing if it's successful or not. And if it does create a successful return, then I get this dopamine rush. That's really the best way of mastering one's addiction, or just trying to learn something new and improving on oneself. And that gives you more and more success. Or you go down to the gym and make your body fitter or healthier. You make a prediction. It works or it doesn't work. But the important factor here is obviously the failure aspect. If it does fail, you need to work harder to achieve that goal. But yeah. This is the intertwining nature of addiction and sexuality and discipline. And this is why it's fairly important to really master all of those features, just so that you can get the biggest amount of happiness in your lives. All right, sorry, I just went into a bit of a divergence there. I was going through also the 4 phases of our sexuality cycles. Next one would be, so we went through excitement. So we're certainly excited by the theory. We get some kind of adrenaline rush. We're like, a little bit short-breathed by the excitement of a certain sexual thing, which may occur very soon. Then there is a plateau. Okay, so I think this is just before we have sex. Anyway, this is so just to mention this. So there is a plateau. Yeah, this is going to be a bit hard to explain. So just before one has an orgasm, there is a sort of plateauing effect of one's nature, just to continue the sexual act. So obviously you're doing a repetitive act of stimulating the 2 sexual organs. There is a plateauing effect. I guess it's kind of weird. Everyone goes through this point of where they're trying to both achieve an orgasm, and there's probably a little bit of pleasure, probably a mild bit of pleasure, maybe a strong sense of pleasure, dependent on how quickly or regularly you have sex and things like that. But there's a plateauing point in which our sexual stimulation goes to that level, and then it gradually rises in terms of stimulation until we achieve orgasm. I guess it's almost like a release pleasure sensation if you've never had one before, and then which I imagine you would have, and then you get to a state of resolution. I guess resolution. Yeah. So you contemplate. I just generally get very tired, but yeah, there's a resolution point where you just relax and stuff like that, and that's where probably the oxytocins and everything else starts to blend into your body and things like that. So there is all these chemical reactions which are occurring in your brain. I guess there is a fundamental driver. It all happens throughout animals, and they all get involved in these chemical reactions in the brains which drive us to do these things. I guess really being a master of one's brain and controlling these fundamental things and factors to a good means is always going to be the most important part of our sexuality. Really, the main thing is obviously try to avoid the thing of lust and getting taken into, I guess it's like the oldest trick of like this insane beautiful woman, not getting caught into the web of that, or this insane beautiful man, but to really just focus upon one's long-term happiness, seeing the virtues and the values and how they can master and discipline their sexuality. Obviously, if you find somebody that is highly promiscuous, then obviously there's certain elements of danger and a lack of discipline which is occurring. So there is important factors over our sexuality and lessons that can be learned, which really can drive us forward as mankind. And there is our own choices. We can make our own choices in life, and it's the voluntary nature which does inspire things. Imagine if government decides or selects your partner for you. There's incredibly destructive things. However, like there's a lot of things where governments do select certain things or ideas and taxes upon you. It's one of those areas where there is a lot of freedom and flourishment, but there is obviously a lot of charlatans out there, and there's a lot of peacocks and all these kind of little things which occur in nature, and it does happen in wildlife as well. It's fascinating, the entire topic of sexuality and all the different elements of what happens and how it touches upon our human spirit itself. And just to say, it's if you're living in a highly repressive sort of family environment where sexuality is a sin and things like that, is that could be fairly damaging in itself. It should just be recognised at least as just saying this is part of human nature. Just these are sort of the truth, like the pointers of it, and there is definitely strong points of how you can master and discipline oneself's sexuality to achieve one's goals of happiness over everything else. But it's a learning game, it's a learning lesson. People go through the trials and tribulations, the tears and everything else of our sexual nature, and it really does it is the stuff of life. So hopefully I've given you some kind of ideas or reflection to ponder upon. If you've got any other ideas or comments or suggestions to get involved with me on this subject of sex, we can keep on going with this. So thank you very much for your time, and I will be back. Goodbye.